I am Keith Maitland. I am the director and producer of Dear Mr. Brody.
Dear Sir, I know the possibilities you ever receiving this letter are about 1 in a million, but I'm so desperate at this stage for help that I just gotta try for the sake of my family.
So a few years ago, I was working for a film producer, and I'd gone to LA to visit his storage unit. While I was there, I noticed about 12 boxes filled with letters. There were so many letters. They were all postmarked January 1970, all addressed to Michael James Brody Jr. And I'm talking thousands and thousands and thousands of letters stacked in boxes. And they were all unopened.
I'm going to give away, I think, $50 million within the next year and set up a foundation and give money to the poor.
Dear Mr. Brody.
Dear Mike.
Dear Mr. Brody, I've read so much about you.
He makes a major announcement that if anybody needs money, here's your answer, Michael Brody. Bingo.
I want to try and cure the problems of the world.
He's so imbued by love that he's going to share his love with everybody by giving them money.
It was 8 6-foot bags stacked with mail from all over the world.
There were hundreds, thousands, I don't know how many people were in the street. He took a handful of 20s and threw it out the window just to watch the madness.
Dear Mr. Brody, are you happy?
Leave me alone. If they crowd me, I've got nothing. You're sick.
He had a plan to end the war in Vietnam.
Do you know much about PCP?
We got on a helicopter and we go to the White House. And he tells him that we're here to see Nixon.
Dear Mr. Brody.
Dear Mr. Brody.
Dear Mr. Brody, the reason I'm writing is right now I have 6 children. We live in an old log house. If I could just receive some help.
Dear Mr. and Mrs. Brody.
Dear Mr. and Mrs. Brody.
Dear Mike.
Was he sincere? Was he a victim? Was he a victimizer?
And it's not money, it's love.
I want to open up every single letter.
Hello, I'm Sonia Winesett, and this is an episode of Filmmaker Focus. Today we're interviewing Keith Maitland, director and producer of Dear Mr. Brody. Hi, Keith. Thanks for joining us.
Hi. Hi, Sonia. How are you?
I'm great. Can you tell me what the initial spark for Dear Mr. Brody was?
The film is a story from 50 years ago that was largely untold. And so when I first heard anything about Michael Brody and his big offer to give away $25 million, it was through an old friend and my wife's college roommate, Melissa Glassman, who is also our producing partner and one of the subjects of the film. She discovered 12 large boxes of letters in a storage unit in LA, and it was that discovery of those letters that led us on this journey.
You could have chosen among any number of lenses through which to tell this story. How did you determine the best approach for this documentary?
Well, my process and my team here at Go Valley, we like to leave a lot of room for discovery when we go out to make a film. So from the outset, what we knew was that there was this kind of incredible story of this larger-than-life hippie millionaire who had inherited $25 million and wanted to give it away. And we knew that we had access to tens of thousands of unopened letters that were all mailed to him in January of 1970 in response to his offer. That's all we knew from the beginning, was that there was a lot to figure out. There was a lot to uncover, but that undoubtedly there was a great story in there, probably too much story than we could tell in just an hour and a half. But our process really was one of discovery. It was let's research everything we can find about Michael Brody and let's start opening as many of these letters as we can. And as far as like how we would tell the story or what it would look like, that was all, remained to be seen when we got started.
Melissa initially wanted to develop a Brody biopic on the fictionalized account. So how did that evolve into a documentary instead?
Well, that's my fault. Basically, when Melissa discovered these letters, she was working for legendary Hollywood producer, independent producer Ed Pressman. Ed's made over 80 movies, going back to his first films were, the first Brian De Palma movie, the first Terrence Malick movie, Badlands. And through the years, Ed has built this incredible, career. And Melissa was working as a development exec for Ed. And she discovered the letters as a part of Ed's archive, as a part of his storage of a project that he intended to make but never got made. It was going to be a fictionalized account of Brody's story. And so when she discovered the letters, she approached Ed and she said, this sounds like a pretty great story. Like, why don't we pick this up? I mean, it's been 40 years, but maybe there's another movie to be made here. But Ed had lost the script. So through all those years, Ed hadn't seen the script, had no idea where it was. The writer of the original script had passed away. So Melissa was really starting from ground zero, and she was trying to build out what this fictionalized account could be today. And so that's how the letters kind of came into our orbit. Melissa sent a box to Sarah and said, please photograph these. Because they're so interesting looking and because they're so beautiful, Melissa thought she could use that as a part of her package to get people's interest in the Brody story and to put together a development fund to commission a writer to write a new script. And once we got our hands on the letters and we started opening them and reading them ourselves, my kind of greedy storytelling mind started spinning its wheels. And it just occurred to me, like in a fictionalized account, I feel like the letters would have been relegated to a montage that dictates the volume of response. But it doesn't necessarily afford an opportunity to tell the faceted, bits of humanity that we were reading in the letters and that Melissa was responding to as she was reading the letters. After talking about it with Sarah a little bit, she gave me the green light to approach Melissa and to say, what do you think about a documentary? What do you think about, making that a part of your process to the fictionalized story? And I think Melissa got it immediately. She was in love with the letters, and she knew that, it's an expansive storytelling to kind of keep adding layer after layer, story after story. And I don't know, I feel like you can get away with that in documentary in a different way than you can in a biopic. So that was my pitch. I asked Melissa if she would approach Ed and see what he thought, and the rest is history.
Well, I think it was a fantastic decision because I love it. I think that the documentary is pretty amazing. So as you're sifting through these hundreds and thousands of letters, like how did the film begin to take shape in your mind?
One of my favorite letters is a little girl. She wrote and she said, I'm 6 years old and I've never had a winter coat. If you send me $5, I'll buy a winter coat. And I don't know why, but as I read that letter, I just saw this picture in my mind of this 6-year-old girl pulling out the chair at her kitchen table, stacking 2 yellow pages, and then climbing up to have enough height to be able to write this letter. And it was just this kind of like image that popped into my mind, this character, this moment of lived life. I remember being that age. I remember those obsolete 1970s relics called Yellow Pages. We opened another letter, and it was from a man who was talking about his 5 children, and he was contemplating suicide, and he didn't know what to do. And we looked him up, and we couldn't find any information about him. But there was just a little smudge in the corner of the letter that looked to me like almost like grease from like dirty hands. And I just imagined this mechanic who was in an auto body shop who, stepped off to the side to write this letter, didn't tell his wife about it, that night over dinner, didn't tell the guys he worked with. This was just like a private moment between him and Mr. Brody captured in this letter.
Dear sir, I know the possibilities you ever receiving this letter about 1 in a million, but I'm so desperate at this stage for help that I just got to try for the sake of my family, as well as myself. I have 5 children. They're all good kids, and it hurts to know they have to suffer for my stupidity. I'm so in debt that I'm on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Lately, I've even been entertaining the thought of suicide. When I look at my wonderful wife and kids, I just can't bring myself to do it. We're existing, and that's about all. We've reached the bottom and just about the end. Respectfully yours, and grateful to you from the bottom of my heart. Donald Thomas Moore.
And so a lot of the ideas for how to approach this film were born out of us reading letters and imagining the lives of the people who wrote them. They gave us context clues. They told us how old they were or where they lived. It was in the postmark. But there was also a lot of empty, space between those letters that gave us room to kind of imagine. And that's almost from the beginning, we started thinking like, we want to do these, you can call them recreations, you can call them what you will. We call them reimaginings. That's kind of like our imagination at play. And so we knew that would be a part of what we were doing, and it would give us an opportunity to cast, great actors. Austin has a really robust independent film scene, and I know a lot of the actors that appear in the film socially. And so it's always fun for me as a nonfiction storyteller and documentarian to get to work, on that side of the creative space. So that was a big part of our beginning, is we knew that we would have these kind of imagined, recreated letter readings. We also knew that we wanted to tell Brody's story as robustly as possible. And because it had been a media event, there was quite a bit of archival footage. And so tracking that down became really our first priority. And we had these two paths at all times, Brody's story and the letters. And whenever we, hit dead ends with one, we could pivot to the other. And, that was a pretty good way to kind of get the ball rolling.
And speaking of Michael Brody, what was your first impression of him as you started to explore archival materials?
Well, the funny thing is, when Melissa first found out about the story, I think it was way back in 2012. And she shared it with us around 2014, 2015. And there really wasn't that much online about Brody. So Melissa had gone to the New York Public Library, and she had pulled every newspaper clipping that she could find, and she provided that to us in this kind of research packet. So we knew about Michael through the eyes of newspaper reporters and through, a handful of photos. It wasn't until we met Jamie Brody, Michael's son, Michael Brody III, that we got a chance to really kind of get to know Michael and Renee through footage. And what's wild about that is it's not home movies that Jamie showed us. It was newsreel and B-roll and unaired news footage that Jamie had spent years tracking down himself. That was like my mind-opening and mind-blowing to meet Jamie, because he let us know, he never got a chance to really know his dad, but he'd spent years collecting every piece of information he could find. And so it was Jamie who shared with us the first bits of active footage that showed Michael as he got off the airplane, as he made his big announcement. And then as we kept watching with Jamie, we started to see Brody's story change right in front of our eyes. We started to see, the crowds grow and the reporters get more curious and more aggressive. And we started to see Michael start to fall apart under the pressure, all through this bit of footage, all while standing right next to his son, over his shoulder, watching, Vimeo clips of collected archival footage. So it was an interesting and unique way to kind of get to meet, our main subject. And at the end of the process, I'm not sure we ever really got a chance to know Michael all that well. Our access to him is pretty limited, and it's pretty much told through those reporters' lenses. And so it's one of my deepest regrets in making the film, is that we weren't able to find more people who knew Michael well, more people who had captured, other facets of his life. He remains a little bit of a mystery.
Can you talk about some of the people you did interview that knew him, that was part of that sort of crazy circus, and how they were integral to the story?
Once we started reading the newspaper articles, even before we met Jamie, before we met Renee, we would see these names kind of pop up. People that were working with Michael, not from the outset. When he made his big announcement, it was just him and Renee at the airport. But almost immediately, he was kind of surrounded by what Renee calls hangers-on. But there was a talent manager who came into the picture immediately and said, "I can get you booked on the Ed Sullivan Show. I can get you in front of the right reporters." There was a bodyguard, or at least that's how Michael referred to him, a guy named Michael Aronin, who we spent time with. But at first, Michael Aronin was just a name in newspaper articles or a name in a caption of a picture. He was often seen just to the left of Michael in a lot of photos. So it was a lot of question marks and a lot of, just like investigative, I don't consider ourselves journalists. I would say it's almost like being private eyes more than being investigative reporters. But things cracked open for us once we met Jamie Brody. And through Jamie, then, of course, we met his mother, Renee, and we brought to them our idea to make this film and our list of other contacts. And they're the ones who recommended that we talk to Don Enright.
I knew him for a couple of years in high school. Michael, entertained at his home and played cards and lost. I knew people who went to Michael Brody's house, to double or triple their money. And Michael didn't care. Michael just wanted the company.
So, like I said, we're investigative, like private eyes, searching for names, searching for clues, trying to connect dots. We don't quite have a board with like string and photos and thumbtacks, but it's not that far off. And so it just became a process.
As you mentioned, Don Enright knew Michael Brody in high school. So was that helpful in kind of, filling in the gaps of who Michael Brody was?
Yeah, absolutely. When we meet Brody through Renee's eyes, he's already a 21-year-old. He's been out on his own for a number of years. And we're really seeing him just through Renee's point of view, which is a wide-eyed young woman who, I think was bowled over by Brody's energy and by the love that he expressed to her.
He was just a beautiful person. We just got very close very quickly. He told me the story of his mother dying when he was little and being very lonely. And I told him about my life, my history, where I grew up, and being very lonely, basically. All of a sudden, you have, sort of a missing part of your life.
That's a really pure and exciting kind of lens to meet a character through. But it didn't answer kind of who he was before that. And certainly the news media, their capture of him was very different. So for the longest time, we had no insight into, young Michael Brody. When we met Don, the first thing he told us is really, I think the first thing that comes across in the film is that he saw Michael as kind of a tragic figure, even at the high school level. He was a lonely kid who wanted friends. He wanted popularity, and he leveraged his privilege to gain that. He lived in a house with basically no parental oversight. His mom had died when he was very young, at 3 years old, and his dad, put Michael in a nice house. First in Long Island, later in Scarsdale. Under the care of a paid nanny and a housekeeper. But Michael Brody Sr. lived in New York City. He kept an apartment in the city, and he kept kind of Playboy's lifestyle. He was a single guy through all those years, and he dated, and he worked hard. And he provided for his children, but he didn't seemingly offer them, a lot of direct care. And so that was an incredible insight. And when Don described Brody's childhood, it matched up with things that Renee told us about her first conversations with Michael, that Michael had grown up lonely and that he was in search of love.
And what about that letter from his old doctor?
Thank you for bringing that up. That's one of the most incredible stories of the entire process, because, you know, that letter was found like a needle in a haystack in the 30,000+ letters that we had access to. And we only opened about 12,000 of them. So there are still 20,000 letters remaining to be opened just from our collection, and maybe 150,000 in Jamie's collection. And so you never know what's in those unopened letters. And we just didn't have the energy and resources and kind of emotional ability to process that many stories. And so as we were opening letters, you learn right away that a lot of the letters are one page and 1 or 2 line requests. Hey, if you're giving out money, I'll take some. Or please send me $100,000. Those letters weren't that fun for us. And so as we were reaching for letters, if they felt like they were only a single page in there, we would often put them to the side in favor of thicker letters, of letters that had photos in them, or you could tell that somebody had written a little mini novel. Melissa picked up a letter, and she looked at it, and she said, oh, this one's from a doctor. But for some reason, it didn't grab her, and she put it on the don't open pile. And my mom reached over, and she said, well, if it's from a doctor, you've got to open that. Got to open a doctor's letter. Now, I still have no idea like what was driving my mom to say that or why she felt that way. But my mom reached over and grabbed that letter, and when she opened it up, it totally changed our entire film, because that letter was from Dr. Naftali Rappaport, MD, and he was Michael's pediatrician back when he lived in Long Island. And in that letter, we got really the most heartbreaking and also the most cohesive kind of piece of information about Michael.
Dear Michael, please excuse the informality. Although you may not remember me, I took care of you when you lived in Levittown. I remember you as a very handsome, blonde, curly-haired, little unhappy boy. Despite the numerous toys and bicycles that you had, you always seemed very angry and irritable. I was always struck by the absence of true concern for your well-being. And frankly, having met several of your nannies, I could appreciate the loneliness that you must have felt. By now, you understand that money isn't going to make you happy, isn't going to make you more secure within yourself. It may even further demoralize you with all the greed. For whatever it's worth, I would suggest that you defer all decisions regarding the distribution of your money and concentrate on coming to terms with yourself. Sincerely yours, Naftali Rappaport, MD.
You know, it's one thing for Don to say in high school Michael wanted friends and he was willing to buy them by losing poker games. It's another thing for Renee to say, you know, Michael grew up lonely, you know, or his dad wasn't a big part of his life. But to get an outstanding letter from, you know, a pediatrician who had cared for Michael for years, and for him to write in and say, what I remember is that you were a lonely, unhappy little boy. I get chills like thinking about it. It's heartbreaking to think of that little curly-haired blonde boy. And when Naftali Rappaport said that, you know, it unfolds in the film kind of as it happened for us. We had just recently gotten our hands on a lot of the family photos that Jamie had collected. And Rappaport was right. When we looked at the pictures of Michael, almost every picture that was taken of him throughout his childhood and adolescence, he's got a sour look on his face. He's just not expressing the kind of joy and happiness that you want to see out of a bright-eyed little kid. And so that letter told us so much about what was going on behind the scenes in Michael's request, and it just reflected and magnified what Don had told us and what Renee had told us and what our own gut instinct was telling us about Michael and about this big story, and it really kind of brought it home for us.
And with so many letters to choose from, like, how did you narrow down which stories you wanted to highlight and who you wanted to get in touch with?
That's always the hardest thing. I mean, no matter what story I try and tell, I always over collect. I over gather information, details, facts, ideas. I love knowing as much as I can about a subject before I even pull a camera out of a bag. And with this one, it was impossible. We literally just relied on our gut instinct to kind of pull aside the stories and the letters and the photos and the people that spoke to us. And because it was a collaborative group effort, different letters spoke to different people. So I remember specifically Holly Hodgkins, who's the first letter writer we feature that we kind of crossed the Rubicon and met all these years later. That was a letter that Megan read. And I remember she was just so impacted by something in that letter.
I wrote this letter to Mr. Michael Brody Jr. I don't really have a real good recollection of writing it, and I'm hoping when I read it, it will jar my memory a little bit. Aww. Dear Mr. Brody, I have read and heard that you have inherited a large sum of money and would like to give portions of it to those who deserve it. Who could deserve it more than the children who are either deaf or have a hearing impairment and other physical handicaps? I am not an old lady preaching to you, but I am a 14-year-old girl who is a sister of a brother with a hearing loss. People say handicapped children always seem to pity them instead of doing something about it. This may be you too. If you saw my brother, I'm sure you and those old ladies wouldn't have pity. He's the smartest, liveliest little devil that without his hearing aid, you would probably never guess. He lived in a world of silence. If you would like to help Andrew, that's my brother, and all his little friends, give a donation towards Easter Seal Rehabilitation Center. If you could see what could be done, you would be very gratified. Goodbye, and thank you for reading this letter, and good luck. Sincerely, Holly Hodgkins. Peace.
I don't know if I had read that letter that I would have been as impacted by it, but I'm smart enough to trust my producers and to see when their eyes light up because they have a strong feeling that that's an instinct I should lean into. Sarah has a letter that really spoke to her. It's the one of the woman just hand drew with a pencil a woman who's half underwater and a little bubble over her head that says help. And we always call that the drowning woman. And that's a letter about a single woman, in her 30s or 40s who lives with her mother and her mother's aging. And just nothing they could do together could get them over their financial burden.
Mr. Brody, dear friend, I'm an unmarried girl living with my mother, who is a widow of long standing. She is sick.
The ones that spoke to me the most, of course, are the entrepreneurs, the independent business people, the filmmakers, the painters, the musicians, but really anybody who's trying to start a business out of nothing. And one of my very favorites, it's featured in the film, not as a direct read of the letter, but what was in the letter. It's actually the first thing you hear when the movie begins and the last thing you hear when the movie ends is this reel-to-reel tape. And it was a woman, I believe she's from Buffalo, New York, and she had recorded 2 songs about Michael Brody and put them onto this tape. And her story was the story that so many artists relate to. She's a musician, a singer, and a songwriter, and her career hadn't gone as far as she wished it would, but she was wishing Michael all the success in the world with his musical endeavors, which were a big part of his story. And she was offering this little piece of reflected art back to him in this haunting piece of music. And for us, what was so exciting about it was when we opened the letter, I mean, it was in a little, manila envelope with a box inside of it. And inside the box was this reel-to-reel tape. And she said, I wrote these 2 songs, and she wrote the lyrics. They had sheet music with them. So we knew what she had to say, but we couldn't figure out what it sounded like because who's got a reel-to-reel audio recorder? Thankfully I live in Austin, Texas, a big music capital. And so it was one quick Facebook post away from finding multiple people in town who had the right equipment to be able to play the song. And when we finally heard her voice, it was so different than what I think we were all hearing in our heads. It was a haunting melody, and we just kind of knew immediately. This is, again, Megan Gilbride. She said, that's the song that plays over the credits. And I said, that's the song that starts the whole movie. And little did we realize we were both right.
So in the process of tracking down these letter writers, I mean, were you surprised by their reactions?
Yes. I mean, the first surprise was just that how almost none of them remembered doing this. At first, that was like shocking to us. Somebody offers you millions of dollars and you take the time to write a letter. I mean, when was the last time you sat down at a table and wrote a letter? But it was a different world. And we had to remind ourselves that, obviously this is before email and text messages and long distance. It was a big deal to have to make a long distance phone call. But it wasn't a big deal to write a letter. So at first, it was a surprise when we would get people on the phone and they would tell us they had no memory of this. They didn't recall. And I equate it to, having thought about it quite a bit, I equate it to, remember that time decades ago when you bought a raffle ticket from somebody's church raffle and you didn't win anything? Of course not. Like, why would that imprint? So when I would call up and say, hey, do you remember this time in 1970 where a millionaire was offering money? I can't tell you how many people just said, you're not going to scam me, and hung up on us. Then the more we talked, the more we explained, what had happened and what we were doing. Invariably, the people would say, well, what did I say in the letter? And we would say, well, we actually don't want to tell you that because what we want to do is point a camera at you while you read the letter on screen for the first time. So I don't want to give you any hints. And that was a challenging thing to get people to agree to do. Many of the people who wrote letters that we were impressed by and that we were impacted by weren't interested in turning back the hands of time. They didn't want to go back to this vulnerable moment in their lives. But we took the people who said yes and we built trust with them. And we said, if you can wait until we can gather our resources, get on a plane and come visit you, we think that this will be a good experience if you can wait to look at this letter and to know what you said all those years ago until we're all together, until my cameras are rolling.
And it was very powerful, your decision to wait, and capture it, on camera as they're reading it and remembering was incredible. It was incredibly powerful. And, so I think that was a great decision on your part.
Well, we didn't know how it would suss out, but it was powerful in the room. That doesn't always translate. As a filmmaker, I've made enough of these now. Like, the process of making these films is literally a million steps, and almost every one of those steps comes with a million problems. So it is a challenge to make these kind of stories. It is why we do it. The challenge is, it's like a puzzle. It's a puzzle without a box, and you're not sure if you have all the pieces. As a matter of fact, you start out knowing you don't have all the pieces. But I stress this to my team here at Go Valley, and I stress this to my subjects when the people who agree to let us point a camera at them, is that the process has to be as important and as impactful as the end result. Because I don't even know if we're going to actually finish these films when we start out to make them. I don't know if I'm going to get the financial resources and support to mount the production that we need to get them onto the big screen, to have conversations like this at the end of the run. So every step of the way, we try and make meaningful and connected and human experience. And so when you're doing that, and when that is your approach, you have so many just incredible moments with people that the room can be filled with laughter, with love, with tears. One of my favorites was the Badger sisters. Their mother was Jacqueline Badger, and we loved that letter from Jackie Badger. She told us the story of raising 4 kids in Harlem, in the projects. She was a single mother, and she wasn't asking for money to just pay her bills and get out of debt. She wasn't asking for anything frivolous, that's for sure. She was asking for an opportunity to build a business that could then lift up her community. She said, I want to teach mothers in Harlem how to type so they can get good jobs, so that they can get off of welfare and support their families. We just loved that letter, and we loved her, and we felt her love, through the paper. And so we were disappointed, when we looked at her and found out right away that she had passed away, almost 20 years ago. But the same moment we found that she passed away, we found a conflicting piece of information that she was alive and well and living in Virginia. And so we scratched our heads a little bit, and that's when we realized one of the 4 kids that she had was basically Jackie Jr. Jackie Badger II was living in Virginia. And Melissa dashed off an email to the address that we found for Jackie Badger, and she responded almost immediately. And she said, not a day goes by that I don't think about my mother. And if you have any information about her, if you've come across anything about her, of course I want to know about it. And so will my sisters. And we said, well, can we hop on a call with you and your sisters? And so we got on with Jackie and Juanita and Brenda. And they just were filled with kind of light and laughter. And they were kind of busting each other's chops and cutting up. And we just said, this is as important to us as the original letter writers. This is a story about children and their parents. It's a story about love through generations. As much as it's about generational trauma, it's about generational love. And we could feel the love with the Badger sisters. And so we asked them if they'd be willing to meet us in New York, to go back to where it all began in Harlem, and to have this experience of reconnecting with their mom through this letter.
This is for you.
What do you possibly think she said in the letter?
I think that she wanted to make it funny, and wanted it to stand out. So of course, she mentioned her children, herself, and just maybe her dreams and aspirations.
I mean, I was only 2 years old, so I couldn't possibly imagine what dreams, maybe another child.
She may have one. No, she didn't want another child. She may have wanted a typing business. Well, slowly just take it out. Notebook paper, really? As she typed it on notebook paper?
What is that?
A staple.
No, it's not.
No, that's hilarious. That's her.
Oh,
my God. I am writing this letter I am writing this letter in response to an article on you in today's edition of the New York Daily News concerning your desire to help others less fortunate than you. I believe you are an answer to my prayers and my last desperate attempt to revive the Badger Home Typing Service business, which I started in March 1966. My name is Jacqueline Badger, and my telephone is disconnected, or else I would have called you up. This is
East Harlem, El Barrio, has many names.
Spanish Harlem, El Barrio.
Washington Projects. This is where we live. This is where it all started for me. I was born in this building, basically. And we lived here for 35 years.
I need $100 and 10 new Remington Rand typewriters, standard office size preferred, and other supplies so that I can teach typing to residents of East Harlem so that mothers can get off of welfare and work. Personally feel a commitment, and duty is calling me. If I don't do it, it won't get done. I want to be a teacher more than anything else in the world. You can read.
I must be successful in my mission. I cannot accept failure or defeat. Mistakes, yes. Problems, yes. Difficulties, yes. But I refuse to give up my dream.
I hear you.
Yep, that's her. She refuses.
This project was unlike any other that I've been involved in. I'm sure will be unlike any that I'll ever be involved in, because the feeling of discovery is always in the air when you're an independent documentary filmmaker, especially when you're telling these stories of the past. But to be able to share these discoveries, to be able to connect the dots through generations, and to be able to kind of have this almost like panopticon of multifaceted human experience all within the wrapper of a 96-minute film is, is unique. And so I don't know, we just loved it.
Well, not all the letters were actually requests for Brody's money. I mean, many wrote to thank Michael and even enclose their own donations to his cause. Can you talk about that and what you think inspired them?
That was one of the first things that grabbed me about Melissa's story of finding the letters, because the way she told it to us, I think she opened like 5 or 6 letters in the storage unit the day she found them. And the way I remember it is that she told us 1 or 2 specific stories, and then the 3rd letter she opened, a dollar bill wafted out. And it was a perfectly crisp, brand new dollar bill from 1969 or 70. And it was one of these folks that said, I think what you're doing is incredible, but you're probably going to run out of money soon, so here's a little bit more to just keep it going. That, honestly, was one of the most important elements of what this story could be. When she told us that, I saw it's not just give me money. It's you've inspired me. You've made me want to do a version of what you're doing. I don't have $25 million, but I have an extra dollar.
Dear Mr. Brody, guess you might figure me to be a freeloader. It's not true. Whenever possible, I too give to those I can help. I'll gladly try to help your cause. Enclosed, find all I can afford to give at this time. I hope you'll understand. This is from the heart, not a joke.
There was a lot of inspiration in those letters, and I think that goes back to what Brody said on day 1 of his giveaway. It's easy to kind of forget because it's in the footage in the first 5 minutes of the movie, and as his story kind of unravels, you don't come back to this idea. But what he said on day 1 is, I want to inspire other people to give. And he said, I want to give $1 million away, and I want to inspire all the other millionaires to each give $1 million.
Why do you think, his offer so quickly went off the rails?
You have to put yourself in the context of those times. This is January of 1970. The 60s just ended, a week earlier. The 60s is such a fraught decade with so many turbulent social movements and political upheavals and assassinations and all the things that made the 60s such a powerful and impactful time. So Brody lived through all that. As a matter of fact, Michael and Renee had just both been at Woodstock less than 6 months before this. Not together, separately they both went. So when he makes this announcement, while he may have had an intention out of the gate to be more like Bill and Melinda Gates, he looked like John and Yoko. They are picture perfect for the 60s counterculture kind of celebrity machine. And they became the very first instant celebrities of the 70s.
All of a sudden we found we had all these hangers-on and potential managers and helpers and friends of Michael, people at the house living there.
And the whole time that's happening, there is, as Don Enright says in the film, the crush of the crowd. There's this pressure coming at him from all sides. And it's a pressure to make good on your big idea. It's a pressure to perform. And so with the hangers-on and with the celebrity status and with the pressure comes the drugs. That was the time, and that was the age, and with the pressure and with the media celebrity, it wasn't a light and fuzzy, psychedelic experience. It was a heavy and quickly dark turning experience. All that together is why it unwound so quickly. Now, Michael has responsibility in that, certainly. He was the one driving the ship. And as a director on a small documentary trying to keep, a dozen people all working and moving in the same direction, I can relate to the pressure he was feeling and to the responsibility of being kind of at the head of that. But, I wish for his sake that he had had more guidance. I wish that he had had the ability to kind of step back himself and kind of take stock of things. That didn't happen, and here we are all these years later talking about it.
So what do you want audiences to take away from the film?
I like to leave as much room as possible for people to have their own interpretation. 1,000 different people will see the film, and I would be thrilled if there's 1,000 different takeaways, 1,000 different reactions. But I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of say, like, what we were guiding people towards was, and I think in all my work is empathy, is perspective. It's an invitation to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Michael threw open the doors and said, "Tell me your story," and people, they ran through those doors, and they did. And so we wanted to share those stories. I don't think there's any way to hear that many different perspectives, that many different voices, to be exposed to that much humanity and not find yourself inspired by what it is to be a person, what it means to overcome adversity, what it means to survive the hard times. And at the end of the day, one of our letter writers is the one who said it best, and Melissa reads it out loud. She said, no matter what you do, no matter what you've accomplished, you've made a lot of people stop and think, what in life is the most important thing to me?
And if you don't give anyone anything else, you have made a lot of people, me included, stop and think, what is the most important thing in life to me?
For me, what matters is finding connection through storytelling. For me, what matters is expressing myself creatively as possible, but humanistically connecting and getting a chance to see my life through somebody else's lived experience. And through that process, know myself better. And so that's what I hope people see, is I hope people sit in a dark room, they watch those reflected lights up on the wall, and they see somehow pieces of themselves, that they know their parents better, that they see a path for their children, and that they walk out into the lobby, if they've seen it in the theater, or over dinner the next day with their family, if they've watched it on Discovery Plus, to debate it and to argue with each other over what it means. Because I'll be the first to tell you, it only means what you say it means.
Well, I thought it was a beautiful film, and I really, really enjoyed it immensely. I think you and your team did a beautiful job. I mean, for me, it was really about the letters and the people that wrote in, just being able to see this sort of snapshot of their life, that moment, when they took the time to write those letters. It's just, it's all about the stories, right? And you did a beautiful job presenting that, as well as,
Thank you.
the enigma that is, Brody. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. Last question. So when did you know that the film was finished in your mind? Was it that last interview? Was it in the edit room, like putting it all together? Like when was the film finished?
I mean, that's a great question, Sonia. I don't know that I ever know that the film's finished. And, when I watch it, I'm re-editing and changing it in my head all the time. I've made 4 feature documentaries now. They've all played at festivals and on, screens and on TVs. And when I see them, I'm always kind of tinkering in my mind and wanting to make changes. So I'm not the best one to figure that out. But what I do is I build a team of collaborators, and we spend a lot of time together. We eat a lot of big lunches, and we debate, and we laugh, and we cry together. And we kind of trust each other to know that we're on the right track and that we're getting closer to the finish line. And, my executive producers, Impact Partners and Topic Studios, were so wonderfully supportive of this film. But the reality is we spent a year longer making it than anybody wanted us to, because that was such a difficult question to answer. It always felt like the next letter that we open is going to blow this thing wide open. I mean, one of the details of it is that, so many of the all of the newspaper clippings that you see on screen in the film, those came from the letters. Like, we would open the letters and people would say, I saw what you did in the newspaper, and there would be the clipping. So our letter writers were telling us the story as we went in so many ways. And so the idea of not opening every letter, not spending the 2 more years it would have taken to open them and process them and chase down leads, that was a challenge. It was a hard decision to make. But Michael is a really important character for us too in this. Michael was there reminding us that this is about connection. It's about finding love that you seek in your life. Michael says in the footage, someone says, how are people treating you? And he says, they shouldn't treat me any better than they treat a bum in the street. And if they treated the bums in the street the way they treated me, we wouldn't have any problems. It blows me away that that's in the midst of really some of the darker and more unhinged aspects of his story when he comes out with that. And you realize his intention was true, and we used his intention as a guide all the way through. And I think when we felt like we had explored that intention as deeply as we could within the constraints of a feature, we needed to call it a day. We needed to wrap this thing up. We still didn't know exactly how we would finish, except there's that haunting tape. And we said that haunting tape is going to be our last sound, our last bit of story. And what's the counterpoint to that? And that's when we realized the letter writers were our conscience. They were our Greek chorus, our peanut gallery. And so we wanted to end out by focusing on the letters and some of the most specific things that the people said back to that question, what in the world matters most to me? And it was family. It was freedom. It was hope. It was clean air. It was health and security. And at the end of the day, it was love.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us more about the film. I, urge everyone to go and see it. It was fantastic and honestly, one of my favorite films. So thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you saying that.